Welcome to today's webinar, Strategies for STEM, Solving the Education Equation, Part 2, Increase Student Access, Educational Equity, and Workforce Diversity, with Mimi Lufkin, Megan Pollock, and Ben Williams. My name is Greg Nagy, and I'm from The Ohio State University who provides technical support for the STEM Equity Pipeline Project. Before we start the presentation, I would like to go over some housekeeping items for this webinar. This webinar is scheduled to last roughly 1 hour and 30 minutes and is being recorded in order to view this presentation in its entirety later. The recorded webinar will be available in the next few days on the napeequity.org website. As you're already found out, you'll be watching the presenters present slides through the Adobe Connect interface while listening to them talk over your computer speakers or your phone. You will also be able to interact with the chat pod. All the participants' microphones and telephones have been automatically muted. If you would like, you can make the presentation larger for just your screen by clicking the full screen button at the top of your Adobe Connect window. Click it again to return to the normal screen. You can download resources from the Files pod. Click the file you want to download, then click the Download Files button. This will open the file as a link in a different tab in your browser. The presenters will answer most questions after the presentation. However, we can take questions at any time. This is how we take questions. At any time during the presentation, you may submit a question by typing your question in the chat pod in your Adobe Connect window. We will read and respond to these questions. I would like to start the webinar by introducing Freda Walker, consultant for the STEM Equity Pipeline Project. Freda?
Thank you, Greg. I want to welcome everyone to today's webinar. It is a follow-up to the webinar that we did in December, Solving the Education Equation. Let's see. Greg has already introduced the three presenters. They are all from the NAEP staff. Our funding today is through NAEP and also the National Science Foundation. We want to remind you that you can look at the archived webinar, including this one, at the stemequitypipeline.org or at the NAEP website. Today, if you complete the entire webinar and you fill out a survey, there will be an opportunity for you to download a certificate of completion. Also, as Greg said, I'd like to remind you to download the documents that you can see in the center of your screen. There are 3 of them. There's a handout for the webinar today, which gives you the contact information for the presenters. It also will list all the links that they're using. There's a NAEP root causes document that you can download, and there's also a NAEP product guide to download. So please click on those and then download each one. We will take our questions, as Greg said, at the very end, but you're welcome to write questions into the chat function at all times, and then the presenters will be glad to answer them. Okay, Mimi and Megan and Ben, you're on. So, Mimi, are you going first?
Let me share my video so you can see me. Hello, everyone. I'm Mimi Lufkin, the CEO of NAEP, and it's a real pleasure to be here with you this afternoon. As Freda mentioned, this is a follow-up webinar from our webinar that we did in December with a team of partners who were involved in helping us release the Solving the Education Equation report that was released earlier in the year in September. The objectives, and basically what happened was we received enough feedback at that webinar about wanting to do a follow-up regarding strategies and the kinds of resources that are available from NAEP and the professional development that's out there that we decided to do this follow-up webinar with you all. First of all, we have 4 objectives for today's webinar. The first is to learn how the NAEP's frameworks transform educational practice, so we'll be talking about a couple of those. We want to reflect on ways in which NAEP's suite of professional development programs and other tools can improve access and success, and many of you can then translate that to the kinds of work that you're doing locally. We want to identify strategies to use in CTE or STEM classrooms and programs, and so we'll be doing that, but we'll also be asking you to share through a chat process we'll be using later in the webinar. So one of the things that I'd like to ask all of you to do as we move through this presentation is to start thinking about what are the things that you're doing that are aligned with the types of activities and programs we'll be talking about during the webinar so that you can share those during that part of the presentation and reflect on the content in the delivery of this particular webinar as well. And lastly, to plan some specific action steps to address the equity needs in your educational community. So again, part of that chat function will also include asking you to think about how might you use the information that you learned today. My job this afternoon is just to do a quick review about the report. Many of you may not have participated in the webinar in December, but I just want to reference that this is the piece that we're building today's webinar from. This report is a piece that we did that's focused on policy and practice related to increasing access and success for underrepresented students in STEM, and certainly looking at the issue of educational equity. The report itself was developed by a multi-stakeholder coalition representing businesses, nonprofits, civil rights groups, K through 12, higher education, associations, and quasi-governmental agencies, all concerned about advancing the U.S. global security and competitiveness through a strong STEM workforce. I wanted to highlight just a few of the infographics that are included in the report and to remind you about why it is that we're having this conversation. And I don't think any of this will be news to any of you who do the work in this field. But certainly the first issue is the fact that we still see significant achievement gaps between students based on race. We also continue to see these same gaps, particularly in STEM, based on gender, and also socioeconomic status, disability, et cetera. So the gaps, what we call equity gaps, continue to exist, and that those gaps exist in both participation and in achievement. And if we don't get these gaps closed in the near future, the impact on our, again, on our global competitiveness and our STEM workforce is going to be highly significant. In addition to the actual achievement gap is this issue of the interest gap. And one of the things we'll talk about in today's webinar is how is it that you build student self-efficacy in order to engage their interest in STEM. And so you'll see here that there also exists a gap, a racial gap and a gender gap in interest in STEM. And for students to take action in terms of pursuing STEM, that needs to be preceded by interest, or interest needs to be developed early on in the process. And of course, the last thing is the demand for STEM workers continues to exceed the supply. Our engineering and computing workforce is continuing to grow. However, the supply of engineers and individuals with computer skills is actually in the decline. So this also needs to shift. What we're going to focus on today that is really sort of the culminating piece of this report is the fact that when we talk about educational equity and improving schools and education reform, frequently the focus of those conversations, discussions, and policies are focused on teacher content knowledge, on pedagogical skills, on accessibility to quality resources, and to meaningful student assessments. And the issue of creating an equitable learning environment is frequently not part of the conversation. We want to add that to this formula. We think it's a critical element in order to really be able to succeed in closing the achievement gap, closing the interest gap, closing the participation gap in STEM. So I'm going to pass the mantle now to my colleague, Dr. Ben Williams, who's going to talk with you a little bit about the program improvement process for equity, which is a transformational process for institutions to look at educational equity in the broadest perspective. Ben?
Thanks so much, Mimi, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being a part of today's webinar, and I'm delighted to have you all join us. A key component of creating an equitable learning environment is really looking at the current context of an educational institution through the lens of what we know from national trends and national research. And the way we can do that is by using a very powerful process called the Program Improvement Process for Equity, or PIPE, which is a program improvement process that brings together teams of educators that represent a local or regional area who can look at their data through each of the lenses that Mimi was just sharing, those of gender, race, and ethnicity, and what we call in Perkins and career technical education special populations, which include students with disabilities, students who are considered economically disadvantaged or low-income students, English language learners, as well as single parents, displaced homemakers, and students who are pursuing programs that lead to what we call non-traditional occupations, or occupations where fewer than 25% of that individual's gender that is represented in the workforce. And then looking at trends across time to help us to see where there are particular gaps in the participation, persistence, and completion of students in our local area or in the region, and then use a process that I'll explain to identify the conditions behind those gaps. What are the root causes that have led to those gaps, those equity gaps in the participation, persistence, and completion of historically underrepresented students in especially these STEM pathways? And how can we then remove those gaps, address those, mitigate those root causes, and identify and implement evidence and research-based strategies to really increase student access and success in these high-skill, high-wage, high-demand career pathways. So the way we do that is we start by organizing a team, which is really the first process in PIPE. So that would be representatives from one's institution or from one's region. These could include teachers, counselors, administrators, partners within the educational pipeline. So if you're starting work at the high school level, at the secondary level, then engaging partners from the middle school, engaging partners from the community college into which your programs might feed through programs of study, engaging community partners, business and industry partners who really understand the local context. One of the key pieces of PIPE and what makes it so powerful is there's no single silver bullet, for lack of a better analogy, for addressing these very complex issues that this work is identifying. And so it's important for us to use the tools we have based on the research, but to look at it directly at what's happening at the local level. And so what we first do is we look at the participation, persistence, and completion of students in specific career pathways. And when we're talking about STEM, specifically in the context of career technical education, we may be talking about STEM in a broader sense than people may be used to. And so when we think about the 16 career clusters that were identified in CTE, and I use CTE as Career Technical Education in Perkins 4 in 2006, 7 of those 16 career clusters could be considered in STEM, and we do consider them. So that would be architecture and construction, agriculture, food, and natural resources, information technology, manufacturing, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, which would include engineering technologies and other types of programs in engineering, such as Project Lead the Way, and then transportation, distribution, and logistics. Those 6 career clusters have a large number of programs that lead to occupations that are still non-traditional for women. So that's where women are underrepresented in the workforce, such that there are fewer than 25% of their gender in the workforce. And in many occupations, in manufacturing, for example, it may be fewer than 10 or even 5%. And then when we think about health sciences, there are many occupations that are non-traditional for males. And still, when we look through an intersectional lens in looking at not only gender, but also looking at socioeconomics, for example, special populations, many of those health sciences programs are particularly underrepresented for males who come from a low-income background. And so all of these fields really would fall within what one might define as high skill, high wage, high demand, and those areas that Mimi was talking about originally where we have major needs but still supply gaps and underrepresentation in the workforce. So in Perkins, we're required to be mindful of the participation and completion of students in programs that lead to non-traditional occupations. And in fact, state agencies and those who receive Perkins funds at the local level have to set and meet certain targets around non-traditional participation and non-traditional completion. So that's often our starting point, but that's not our ending point. because the data that we typically get to do that work is aggregated. It's everything combined. So what we need to do is we need to go more granular. We need to look at the program level, and we need to look at it through each of those lenses we've talked about, through the lens of gender, through the lens of race and ethnicity, and through the lens of special populations. And we need to also look at where there might be intersections that we need to be mindful of. Are there underrepresentations of certain groups of students in certain programs that may be in higher demand in a particular community? And then we don't want to just look at that as a snapshot in time. We want to look at the current context. We want to look at it both at the national level, but then see it at the local level, and then look at it across time. And we use data dashboards to do this. So we can take that data and then be able to capture it visually and graphically through a data dashboard, through which teams of educators can then identify gaps in the participation and completion of students through each of these lenses, as well as an intersectional lens. So our starting point is really understanding our baseline. So where are the gaps? Then once we've identified the gaps, then we want to understand why. Why do these gaps in the participation, persistence, and completion of these different subgroups of students occur? And so let me just throw out to the group right now, what do you think are some of the key conditions or root causes or reasons why there's an underrepresentation of students in many of these programs, especially when looking through the lens of gender, race, ethnicity, and special populations? So start throwing out your observations, your experiences, what you think. Economics, stereotypes, yes. Mentors or often lack thereof, yes. Role models, and especially role models through whom students can see themselves mirrored as successful in that particular career. Childcare for women in mining, yes. So there are critical issues in terms of access, which could include childcare, which could include transportation, depending on the context. Lack of awareness of certain industries, yes. Long history of gender-heavy health programs, academic preparedness, fabulous. Keep the responses coming. These are excellent. And so one of the tools we wanted to provide to you today, because we want to provide a number of different mechanisms through which you can begin to engage in this work or continue work that you're doing using these resources that we're going to be talking about today. The first of those is something you can download from the documents to download, which is called, in this case, NAEP Root Causes Chart, but is called the Non-Traditional Career Preparation Root Causes and Strategies. And this document really organizes what we know from the research, those key root causes or conditions that are the greatest barriers to students entering into non-traditional programs, especially those programs that would fall within STEM. And they fit into 5 different categories. The educational environment, which can include things like academic proficiency or access to and participation in math, science, and technology courses. It could have to do with instructional strategies, which is something my colleague Dr. Megan Pollack will be talking about shortly. Support services, as well as classroom and school climate. Family perceptions and the expectations that might be placed on students based on traditional gender roles, for example. Career information or lack thereof, or lack of early exposure or timely exposure of career information to students to help them to make informed decisions, as well as societal issues, which could include things like lack of role models, mentors, poor collaboration in a local or regional area, or folks competing for the same students without necessarily considering which is the best fit for a particular student. And ultimately, how all of these things affect students at the individual level, which could then bring in things like stereotype threat, which one of our colleagues mentioned in our chat, as well as effects on self-efficacy and mindset, which I believe Megan will be talking about shortly. So this tool is very powerful, and it is actually grounded in a larger document that you can access from the NAEP website by just going to naepequity.org/root, R-O-O-T, which will actually be identified at the end of our webinar. where you can actually download the document where you can read more deeply into each of these root causes. So that's our starting point. So bringing together a team of individuals who can talk about those key root causes that might be happening at the local level. But not stopping there, because it's very important to check in with one's stakeholders, whether they be teachers, students, parents, community members, counselors, advisors, depending on one's context. And so it's important to engage in action research to validate those assumptions we might make around the root causes that might be in effect. So we can use mechanisms such as surveys, such as equity audits, interviews, focus groups in order to validate and also nuance our understanding of those root causes so that when one comes to then say, what are we going to do about this, we can make sure that the strategies are aligned to address those key conditions that seem to be the biggest barriers to students. And in my experience doing this work around the country at the regional level and the local level, much of it has to do with that lack of career information and the degree to which students have a broad understanding of the full spectrum of what's out there. And then also those stereotypes that was identified by one of our colleagues in the chats, which Megan will be talking about shortly. But there are many other issues as well, including role models, lack of mentors, and the like. And so there are lots of different ways we can approach this. So as we move from first exploring the data, then identifying the root causes and key conditions that are barriers to students, we then look at how can we select specific strategies to mitigate those root causes, and how can we base those strategies on what we know has worked in the past. And so on our website, there are some wonderful resources that provide additional information to educators to help them to understand what are evidence and research-based strategies that can help to mitigate these root causes. And if you look at the flip side of the chart, actually the right-hand side of the chart, on the left is in purple are the root causes and the theory behind that. On the right-hand side in green are the specific strategies that are aligned to those root causes. And on our website, one can then go deeply into, or more deeply into, looking at what people have done in the past and use that to help inform how they might go about implementing a similar strategy. And then ultimately act on that strategy and do it in ways where one can see whether what one is doing is having the desired effect, both in terms of process and in terms of outcomes. And then we repeat this process to broaden the impact. And throughout this process, we're also completing a plan that captures each step so that this then becomes a mechanism that educators can use as they move forward in not only identifying specific strategies, but implementing them, learning from the process, and continuously working to remove and mitigate those barriers that their research validates. What's exciting about PIPE is that it can be applied not only at the institutional level, but it can also be applied at the individual level. And so when we think about ourselves and our own practices and what we know from the research, especially that which Megan will be talking about shortly, we can also explore our own practices and also explore our own experiences, come to discover and uncover and identify those areas that we may want to address or that we see our students might be having to navigate, if you will, select specific strategies based on the research, what we call super strategies in our micromessaging curriculum, and then act on those by looking at what the impact is on students. And so what we do is we become scientists in our own classroom. We become the independent variable, that on which everything is directed. And so looking at our own practices, looking at our own classroom climate, looking at our own materials, looking at the examples we use, the colleagues from our community who come in where our students may or may not see themselves mirrored, and ultimately the effect it has on our students. And so we wanted to frame, as we move into talking about specific strategies, how one can use PIPE, the Program Improvement Process for Equity, to use data as a starting point to identify equity gaps in the participation, persistence, and completion of students through the lens of gender, through the lens of race and ethnicity, and through the lens of special populations, as well as an intersectional lens that looks at the intersection of the different identities, to then look at specific root causes and conditions that may be barriers to students entering into those pathways, help us to identify research and evidence-based mechanisms that we can use to mitigate those barriers, and then give us a process by which we can continuously address these complex issues. So with that, I would like to invite my colleague, Dr. Megan Pollack, to now talk about a framework through which we can then look at the effects that implicit bias has on students as we think about these barriers that may exist to entering into these high-tech, high-wage, high-skill STEM career pathways. So Megan, take it away.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. I am excited to be here to talk a little bit about some of the programs that we implement across the country to help educators and to help institutions really address some of the issues of equity and access that we've been talking about. So as you've been able to tell, we care a lot about equity, and we're focused on how do we improve access for every student, and ultimately we're trying to target the workforce diversity. And so drawing from the mission, this is really what grounds everything that we do. We are striving in every way, in every product, in every professional development, in every webinar, in every engagement with educators. We are striving to both build and equip educators to help to have the capacity that they need to implement really, really effective solutions that are grounded in the research and grounded in the literature, really targeting to increase student access, educational equity, and workforce diversity. And so I hope that you hear those words continue to resonate in what we talk about with the theoretical frameworks that ground our professional development and our tools. So if you've participated in any of our webinars, or maybe some of you have participated in some of our professional development in the past, you're probably familiar with this framework. And this is the framework called the culture wheel that was created by some of our colleagues a few years ago that's grounded in the literature. And what this has become is NAEP's theoretical framework. And what I mean by that as a theoretical framework is this is the lens to which we approach how we help educators understand and acknowledge how we can have an impact in transforming our own practice and ultimately the classrooms to which we serve students of all different types. And so it starts with cultural stereotypes. So we acknowledge the fact that there are stereotypes about everything in life, right? If we're going to focus on STEM careers or career and technical education at this moment, there are so many stereotypes related to many of these non-traditional careers. So I'm an engineer, so I'll talk about some of the stereotypes about engineers. So one of the easiest stereotypes that people can identify about engineers is the fact that engineers are nerdy. They sort of take on this archetype of the cartoon character Dilbert, right? So he's this sort of boring white guy that lives in a cubicle that has no personality and lives a really sad life existence stuck in this cubicle, right? And that's a stereotype, and that stereotype has been perpetuated in many different ways. We see it in popular television shows like The Big Bang Theory. We see that stereotype perpetuated in Best Buy's Geek Squad. So the people who many people call to come fix their computers, they have that same sort of white shirt buttoned up, suspenders, high waist pants, high water pants, and loafers, and like the Buddy Holly glasses with tape on them, the pocket protector, right? So this image, this stereotype that has persisted for so long, what happens is it continues to perpetuate. And the fact that how we perpetuate that in the media and all of the sort of jokes and things that we say about engineers is that stereotype actually becomes biases that exist in each and every one of us, right? And so whether you believe that stereotype to be true or not, right? So clearly I don't believe that stereotype to be true because I look nothing like Dilbert. While I don't believe it to be true, the fact that stereotypes about different types of people, those single narratives that exist, the fact that they are in our brains means that our brain can access them and use them without our permission. And so these biases that are our brain is pulling from all of these different things and making decisions without our permission, because if we had to make every single decision of every single day, we would fall over. Like our brains couldn't function and process that much data all at once. And so these biases that each and every one of us good people hold, we all have biases. These biases begin to manifest in our interactions with one another. And how those biases manifest are what we call micromessages. And so micromessages, they can be positive, they can be negative. And so micromessages are small, very subtle, unconscious messages that are both sent and received when we communicate with others. And so the biases, as our brain is making decisions and it's calculating risk and it's making decisions on safety and all kinds of things, so it's pulling from all of those things that are part of our history, our past, our upbringing, the things that we watch on TV, the things that we read. It's drawing from all of that, and it's manifesting in how we communicate with one another. And the different ways that micromessages manifest are in the basic ways of communication. So the first thing is like how a micromessage is said, so like how something is said. This is the easiest type of micromessage to identify, and it's usually the easiest to remember. So it's very easy to remember sometime when someone said something that hurt your feelings, right? Sometimes they seem more like macro messages than micro messages. But a lot of times people don't intend them, and that's the thing about micromessages is they are unintended. They are unintentional messages that we send and receive when we're communicating with one another. The second way that micromessages can occur is how it's said, right? So if a student comes, say if I'm a counselor and a student comes to me and says, hey, Dr. Pollack, I want to be an engineer. And as their counselor, I look at them and I look at their transcript and I say, you know what, engineering's hard, but it's a great career. It's going to take a lot of work for you to get there, but let me see what you've got to take to get there. Okay. All right, well, you can do it. Let's make a plan. That's one message. Now let me say it in a different way, and that will communicate a different message. Okay, so again, I'm the counselor. Student comes to me and says, hey, Dr. Pollack, I want to be an engineer. I say, oh, you want to be an engineer. Engineering's hard. Oh my goodness, I'm looking at your transcript. You've got a lot of classes to take to get there. Well, you could do it. Okay, now I exaggerated that, but essentially I said the exact same thing in two different ways. And it sends a message of two totally different things, right? So what happens is if I'm that counselor, I'm actually coming from a place of caring. I'm thinking that this student isn't prepared at this moment to go into engineering. I'm concerned that this student might not like a career in engineering. I have all of this intention, like good intention built in to my approach to the student. But what they hear is disbelief that I don't think that they can do that, right? And so that's what happens with micromessages. We intend one thing, but the impact of those micromessages that we send is greater than our intent. The impact of those micromessages is much more powerful than what we want them to hear from us, right? So that's two different examples. That's how it's said and what's said and how it's said. So the other ways that micromessages occur are what we call contextual or omission. So I usually group these together. So it's generally like what's said or what's not said or what's there or what's not there. An example of this would be in the school where I did my dissertation data collection, there was a shelf full of robots. It was a high school engineering program. And when I was doing my initial analysis of the classroom, I noticed that all of the robots were named boy names, and like very Western names at that, like John, Ben, very like Western names. And I brought it up to the teacher, and I was like, hey, like, is there any reason why you couldn't have a female's name or a non-stereotypical Western name on one of your robots? And she was like, oh, gosh, I never noticed, right? I never noticed that all of the names were of one, gender. And so this was an easy change, right? But the message in that, the micro message in that is that by the fact that all the robots have the same, type of name, it creates this idea that females and many students of color and different types of people don't fit in this space, right? So by creating robots with different kinds of names, it improves the equity in that classroom by making it more inclusive, right? But that's a really subtle message by just having different names on robots, right? And the other way that micromessages can happen is in body language, right? It's a simple form of communications that a lot can be said in that. And so often our body language is absolutely drawing from our implicit mind, right? It's drawing from most things that are happening with us. If we're tired, if we're distracted, especially if all of those factors are in play, we're going to have different kinds of body language in how we communicate with one another. The body language plays a really big role in the classroom and like how we look at, engage with different types of students. One of the resources that NAEP has and provides is a tool on doing classroom observations and how to have a trusted colleague come into your classroom to observe different things. And one of the easiest things for them to begin to track is like how often do you call on students and what kind of eye contact do you have with students and the students of different gender and of different races. And it's amazing that one of our consultants that works with us and was one of the original authors of this curriculum, he's a high school physics teacher, and I love to tell the story because, again, like the guy cares about equity. He cares about equity in STEM and you know, starting to write this curriculum. And he was like, well, of course I don't have a problem. Of course I don't have a problem calling on girls as much as boys in the classroom. Like, I care too much about this, right? So sure enough, he had a friend sit in and observe, a trusted colleague sit in and observe him. And so even though like he knew that this person was observing him, and so clearly you're going to overcompensate a little bit, right? So with all of these factors, he still did not call on females in his physics class at the same rate that he called on boys. He was stunned and shocked, right? Well, that's how bias happens, right? We don't know it. So even though he was being so intentional to call on girls at almost a higher rate than boys, when averaged out over the course of the classroom, evidence still showed that he was calling on boys, right? Like, and that was unintentional.
It looks like we lost Megan. Fred, are you still muted?
Hello, everyone. It looks like we've lost our speaker. I'm sure that she will bump herself back in, so maybe we can, Mimi or Ben, do you want to try and, maybe Ben, would you like to answer the question that we have about micromessaging, professional development that can be done with industry partners, and also your response to the person that was talking about the professors, college professors. So let's do that, and oh, Megan's back in.
She's back. Well, what I was going to do, and Megan, this might be an opportunity, just because we had that lost you for a minute, is maybe open it up for some reactions from our audience as to what's resonating with people and what kinds of questions might be coming up right now, and then we can continue from there.
Sure. Sorry about that. The whole application crashed. You know, technology is always going to give us some challenges. That's why we need more engineers and scientists to fix it. So
thank you, Megan. Okay, I'm giving it back to you, Megan.
Okay, so if you have some questions, drop those in the chat box. Fred is capturing those for me, and we'll come back. So one of the last types of micromessages and the ways that micromessages manifest is in how we give feedback. And the research shows that both male and female educators, or parents for that matter, are more likely to give girls feedback on how pretty their work is than how good it is as far as quality. Whereas they are more likely to give boys feedback on the quality of their work and less likely to give feedback on like how pretty and creative it is, right? And so again, both male and female teachers are equally guilty of this. And this draws on deeply rooted cultural stereotypes about women and about the presentation that women have in the world. And it's not intentional, right? But we have to be really cognizant of how those old cultural stereotypes become biases that we hold and how we give feedback, right? I pay attention to this with the students that I work with my nephews and my niece. I pay attention to like those sudden like drops of feedback that I give them. Am I praising my niece? Am I going to praise her more about how pretty her work is versus the effort? And it's so subtle, right? And we don't intend it. And that's, again, goes back to the entire point of micromessages, is that the impact is greater than intent. So those are the 6 different types of micromessages, and the positive micromessages, what's so powerful about positive micromessages is these build students up. They make students feel valued, they make students feel encouraged, they are positive, they make them feel included, whereas micro inequities or negative micromessages, you can think of it as a wall. These tear students down. They make students feel excluded, they are discouraged, they are more likely to feel isolated, and we don't want to send those messages, right? We want to build our students up with really positive micro-affirmations. And so the next part of the culture wheel is understanding that we've got all of these different types of micromessages. Well, they accumulate. So maybe one tiny micromessage isn't going to make or break a child, but what happens is the accumulation of these messages over time have a tremendous impact on a student. And the accumulation happens like this. So when I was working on my master's degree at Texas Tech, Reckham, so one of my professors, his name is Dr. Cox. Maybe I shouldn't say his name, Dr. Cox. I tell the story all the time. He is an incredible man. Like, I had known him since before I had even started my undergrad. When I started, he worked for Texas Instruments and had created this amazing fellowship that paid for all my school. It was called the Women in Engineering program, right? So I knew this man cared very deeply about my success, right, and my ability to become an engineer. But what happened is so by the time I got to Texas Tech, he had retired, and he was teaching classes there. And what happened in the classroom is those deeply rooted cultural stereotypes that were part of his upbringing, right? So this gentleman, I don't know how old he is. I'm guessing he's in his 80s at this point. So those stereotypes that he held would sometimes manifest in the classroom in kind of pretty negative ways. Okay, so one example was, and one of the things that I loved about him is he had the greatest examples, and because he had spent like 40 years in the industry. And so one day he was like, who knows something about trains? So let me set the picture here. I'm the only female in a class of 70 students, right? And I shoot my hand up, I knew something about trains. His immediate response was, Megan, you're a girl, why would you know anything about trains? So how do you think I felt? I felt discouraged, excluded, devalued. I didn't feel like I was part of that group. Like, I didn't feel great about that. But what happened is because I had so many positive messages from Dr. Cox, that every once in a while, when those little micro inequities slipped out, they didn't register and they didn't impact me in the same way. So that's the great news. The great news is that we can provide really positive, intentional micro affirmations to build our students up, so that when those negative micro inequities, those things that are part of our unconscious that we don't recognize and we don't always get to catch, when those manifest, they don't register in the same way. And so why this is so important is accumulation, is this affects student self-efficacy, and this is their belief that they can or cannot do some type of task. And a student's self-efficacy, particularly if we're continuing with the narrative about my experience in engineering and with women in engineering in general, if women continue to have a low self-efficacy, to not believe that they can and do STEM kinds of courses and classes and pathways and go into those types of careers, what happens is their behavior maintains the status quo, right? So if girls and women continue to have low self-efficacy and do not choose non-traditional careers, what that does is reinforces the cultural stereotypes. So you see the wheel here, right? So you see how those all connect. And so what we have to do, the challenge that we have as educators, is to understand, what are the biases that I have? What are the parts of my upbringing? What are the parts of my lived experience that could have a negative impact on how I interact with, engage, and communicate with students, right? And so the point of interruption is understanding our bias and begin recognizing how those biases manifest in our interactions, and being then really intentional about providing positive micro-affirmations that build up student efficacy to ultimately change their behavior, okay? So this is our cultural framework. This grounds all of the work that we do. And so with this, I want to kind of lead into giving you a little bit of overview of the different types of products that we have and how this shows up in the classroom. So let's see. All right. So the question, again, that we always pose to educators and what's posed to us and why we get to work with them is we're trying to help students reach their potential, right? And so when we come into the classroom and we're coming into the classroom to teach teachers and to teach educators, the question is, how do we help students reach their potential? How do we get them to realize their potential? And so the framework that we have recently devised is to check the radio and to tune into micromessages. So check the radio and tune into micromessages. So radio is a mnemonic, and so this is designed to help our educators understand how we can begin to implement the practices that are part of our curriculum in the classroom. And so the first R stands for to reflect on bias and stereotypes. This is so key. So we have to understand those biases that we have and understand the stereotypes and how they exist and begin to challenge those. So A is for anticipate. We have to anticipate the impact of our decisions, our words, and our behaviors, those little ways that those biases can become to manifest. D is for discover. We have to discover and address negative ways, the negative micromessages that are part of our communication and our interactions with students. I is for identify. We have to identify ways to give positive micromessages. That's how we build up our student self-efficacy, is through positive, intentional micro-affirmations. And then the O is for offering high expectations and wise feedback. And so this mnemonic is really designed to help educators understand and apply the principles of our theoretical framework. And it is, in fact, one of the posters that we have available. Again, self-efficacy is a key part of our curriculum, and so much of the work that we do is tied into this. Like, how are we going to build student self-efficacy to believe that they can succeed? How can we help those students realize their potential? And so self-efficacy, as I said, is a belief that one holds in their ability to perform a specific task. A student with a high self-efficacy, they're going to have greater achievement, greater interest, motivation, engagement, persistence, performance. And what's so fantastic about students with high self-efficacy is that they are more likely to adopt and commit to more challenging goals. This is what we want our students to have, right? Yes, we want them to have high self-efficacy. Well, a student with a low self-efficacy is likely to doubt and fear their abilities, and they're many times just going to avoid the task, right? And so a student with a low self-efficacy, they are going to avoid challenges. They're not even going to try because they don't believe that they can do those tasks. So all of the curriculum that NAEP has and the structure and the way that we teach educators is designed to understand how our work, how our instructional practices, how our pedagogy and the way that we teach the curriculum, how it's affecting the self-efficacy of our students. And ultimately going back to those positive things, how is it affecting their interest, their motivation, their achievement, their persistence, and their performance? And so one of the ways that we teach self-efficacy and how to build self-efficacy, we incorporate ideas of growth mindset and how to give really effective feedback. We have a new toolkit that I'll just mention in a second about both of these two new frameworks, and it's just really exciting. So this segues into products and services. I want to give an overview of the different ways that we apply the program improvement process for equity as well as the micromessaging framework. And so the first way that we are able to help schools and institutions and educators across the country is in person. This is our passion. We want to work with educators. We want to engage with them to help them to transform their own practice. We want to work with institutions to address institutional and systemic issues within the institution that is causing some of the inequities that are keeping students from performing, persisting, and completing those different programs. The second type of in-person training that we offer are these long-term educational equity programs. Ben talked a little bit about the program improvement process for equity. That's a big engagement. It takes time to do the work and to understand how we work through that process of addressing institutional issues of equity. We also have the Micromessaging Academy, and I'll talk about that in just a couple of slides. One of the other ways that we help to meet the needs of educators across the country is we give keynote addresses, and we are available to be guest speakers or panelists. Another common thing that is needed is just consulting services. So if you are having issues on your campus that need to be addressed, we can come in and provide support to help you address some of those needs. And then finally, the last in-person tool that we offer are professional learning communities that are based on the curriculum that we provide. For the long-term educational equity programs, the professional learning communities are built into that. That's part of how that system works. But we can also provide those independently as well. So in hand, what we have, so the different types of professional learning tools that we have, we've got some great infographic posters, and I'll show those to you on the next couple of slides. The turnkey implementation toolkits, so we have 2 that have been released and been out for the Explore STEM Careers Toolkit has been out for a few years. Last year we released the Explore Non-Traditional Careers, and we've got a whole slew of exciting toolkits that are coming out. I'm going to tell you in just a second. In addition, we've revised our curriculum so that we now have workbooks that are tied to all of the instruction that we provide there at professional development. So there are, actually, here's one right here. So we have workbooks like this that accompany all of our professional development. We have 2 different types of cards. So we have kudos cards. These are cards that you can write notes to your students, and interest cards as well. And then you've already heard maybe talk about the policy report. Was there a question? I just heard. Nope. Okay. So the third type of way that we help schools and institutions across the country is online. So we are able to do virtual workshops, very similar to what we're doing right now. So some people prefer a webinar and a more one-directional approach or an interactive approach. My preference is to interact. My goal is to get people to learn, and to get people to learn, we must interact with them. Ben talked about the Perkins Data Dashboard development. That is something that we can do to help you understand what's happening on your campus, and that's generally a part of the program improvement process, so that long-term educational equity program. We also have the ability to design custom online courses to meet the needs of your school, and again, consulting service and professional learning communities. So I want to tell you about some exciting news about our toolkits. So if you've been around for a while, you know that we have Explore STEM Careers Toolkit. This is a project that I got to do for NAEP years ago, and it was our very first toolkit, and that was a product of years and years of working with counselors here in Texas and customizing worksheets and strategies for them to work with students to get them excited about STEM careers. And so that is one of my favorite and our legacy toolkit. The next toolkit that came out last year is Explore Non-Traditional Careers. The micromessaging framework is, again, at the core of every single one of these curriculums. And so that toolkit helps educators to understand and transform their practice related to challenging gender stereotypes and improving equity in those non-traditional programs. So releasing in just about 6 weeks, 2 months, we have the Realizing Potential with Mindset. And this is based on the fixed and growth mindset and how educators can teach their students to improve their mindset, how teachers can teach with a growth mindset. And again, all of this is trained in how to build up our students, to build up their self-efficacy. Releasing this summer, we have 2 toolkits. One is project-based learning for STEM equity. So what this does is it provides an equity rubric to help educators who are already doing project-based learning to evaluate those PBLs, to ensure that they are addressing all of the things that we know about how to create equitable classrooms and equitable projects, so that those are really reaching their potential to encourage and inspire the interest of our students to go into STEM careers. This summer we also have a new toolkit coming out called Eliminating Barriers by Challenging Gender Norms. This is different than the work that we've done in the past related to micromessages, where we have had, in many cases, a focus on increasing female participation in STEM. But the eliminating barriers by challenging gender norms is really getting to the heart of how we do gender in the world. And this is going to be a great toolkit to help educators all across the country recognize and be empowered to address some of those imbalances. And then this fall, we have another toolkit that's based on the self-efficacy framework called Inspiring the Courage to Excel. So what I want to wrap up the toolkit slide here with is that these toolkits, they are designed for several purposes. So the first purpose for them, they are the curriculum for the professional development workshops that we lead across the country, led by certified equity instructors. but they are also designed for individuals to do as a self-paced personal development tool. So that you can read through them and that you can do the activities and that you can reflect and learn. We certainly encourage opportunities for everyone to participate in a professional development because it heightens your ability to learn and engage and reflect and discuss. But we realize that that's not always an option. The third is professional learning community guides. So we've also designed them in a way that there are lesson plans and activities that you do as you read through the content. And these lesson plans and activities are designed for groups of educators to do together. Because we're trying to change the world, right? Like we want people to take this and to do the work. And that's what these are designed to do. They're designed to help people to do the work and to reflect and to transform their practice and to transform their institutions. And finally, in many cases, a lot of the lesson plans that we've designed, we have customized in special ways to actually do with students, right? So like in the Explore Non-Traditional Careers Toolkit, there are some activities that are designed specifically for educators, but there are some that help educators. They can also then do with students, like challenging stereotypes and gender norms and things like that. So these are our toolkits. So I encourage you to think about, as you're planning your budgets for the next school year, to save some room for us, because we want you to have an opportunity to purchase one of these new toolkits as a workbook, and so that we can come out and train your staff on these new frameworks. And so we invite you to do that, and you can contact me if you have any more questions about those. They are not on the website just yet. In addition, we have infographics, and these are posters. They're posters, pictures, infographics, whatever you want to call them, and we've got a variety of these. So we have posters based on the two frameworks that you've heard today, the program improvement process for equity and the cultural framework. We also have two different types of posters coming out based on self-efficacy. So the one that's labeled 6, that is for educators. So that's a great one for the teacher's lounge. On the bottom of the mountain picture are specific super strategies for how to inspire student self-efficacy. And then the one inside of that is a poster specifically for students. So it's with strategies to help them build their own self-efficacy. We also have the radio framework, how can every person reach their potential, with the mnemonic there. And then we have a poster on learning knows no bounds. And then we also have an infographic poster that lays out all of the different images and then sort of an equation status based on the Solving the Education Equation report. The last couple of products that we have available are these, I mentioned these, the STEM career interest cards. And these are basically designed as a handout to maybe send it home to parents, to send to students, or they're designed to send home, but to give to students, to get them to think about really creative ways of how they can have access to STEM that's grounded in the literature. And I'm sorry that this top picture is overlapping the bottom ones, but the bottom ones are our kudos cards, and these are designed to, they're connected, again, drawing on the literature and self-efficacy and the effective STEM messaging. But they're designed for you to write notes to students, helping them to connect what they have done or achieved or what you've noticed with a STEM career. And so those are really grounded in self-efficacy theory. And so at this point, I want to pause and make sure we capture any questions, and then I would like to take us to the reflection activity.
So Megan, if you will look over, can you see the saved questions there?
Okay, yes.
Okay, so I would like to start with the one that is asking about, they said that Benita said that you had come and done some training on gender equity with them, and will there be a part 2? What are you all thinking, what is NAEP thinking about in relation to the training?
So we haven't called it part 2, but we are developing new curriculum, new activities, and what we're doing is we're expanding on some of these different theories that we've been teaching. So for example, we're expanding on self-efficacy, we're expanding on growth mindset, we're expanding on creating equitable classrooms and equitable pedagogical strategies. And so what we're doing right now is we're developing a curriculum. That's what we're focusing on. We're taking, because the framework is solid, it's grounded in the literature, and we're building out different pockets. And so what I can absolutely do for, if you've already been trained on the micromessaging curriculum, contact us and let me see how I can apply some of the new curriculum into meeting the needs on your campus. And I'm developing stuff just as fast as I can. So stay tuned, and we have so much great new curriculum coming out in the next year. It's going to be a good year. So thanks, Benita. What's the next question I should tackle?
Okay, the next question is, where do I find pricing information for professional development or virtual workshops? Can you give them some idea about how that works with NAEP?
Yeah, so thanks for the question, Esperanza. So you can contact me. My email will be up on the screen later, or on our website there's a form to request information on professional development. And so basically it's a conversation with me. We talk about that. We don't post that, but I'm happy to provide that pricing for you. So please reach out and look forward to hopefully working with you.
Okay, another one I'd like for you just to comment. Well, let me ask one more question here. It says, are the Kudo cards for handing out to students?
Yeah, so what's happened with the Kudos cards, and this is really fascinating, is people have done all different kinds of things. They're designed for you to hand to a student, to write a note and to hand to a student. But they are also, people have made like really amazing bulletin boards out of these. So they write different notes, and they're like it's a very friendly kind of environment because people are building one another up. I've also had educators say that they like to mail them home like actual postcards because while it's to the student, it's in the parent's hands, and so it reinforces some of that positive messaging to them as well and begins to challenge some of their stereotypes. And so they are things that you could staple to a homework assignment and hand back to them. There's no end to how you communicate to a student with those. So, yeah.
Thank you, Megan. Another question it has to do with grade span. Are these toolkits aimed at a particular grade level or grade band?
So the Explore STEM Careers Toolkit is really targeted at...
I can't hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry. The Explore STEM Careers Toolkit is really targeted at like a middle high school audience. But all of the development work that we've done past that has been, we've tried to span a greater range, so to include post-secondary. One of the challenges that we do have is that a lot of the activities that we have, while they're great for elementary educators, the activities aren't necessarily designed for elementary students. They're not at that developmental level. It's one of the things that's on our to-do list to begin to expand our curriculum, or specifically our activities to that level. But the frameworks, the professional development that we offer, while it is still very useful to educators across the span from pre-K to post-secondary, the activities are really right around the sweet spot of middle high school and just after college. I'm sorry, just after high school.
Okay, another question has to do with does NAEP provide any professional development for industry partners, employers, apprenticeship training centers, etc.?
So we've had a couple of different partnerships with industry, and one of the ways that we did that was to train STEM professionals to be effective STEM role models, because the research shows that us engineers in general are our own worst storytellers. So we perpetuate some of those same stereotypes over and over again. And so we worked with industry partners to help them to train their staff to be great ambassadors of STEM and to carry out those effective messaging. And so that's the one thing that we've done primarily. We've looked at other options. Again, the theoretical framework that we have applies to all walks of life, not just in the classroom. Like if you think about the micromessaging framework, that's great for you and the team that you manage, your work environment. It's great for you and your family members. These messages apply in all different lenses, and so we are looking at more ways to expand our work into industry. So if you've got some ideas for that, we'd love to talk to you about that. And again, Mimi typed in the the browser there. In fact, the URL, if you go to napequity.org / I'm typing it here, /ROL models. If you go to that URL, we've got great resources related to training role models and to finding role models for your students as well.
Okay, Megan, this is a question from Eva, and it has to do, is there a webinar that gives a broad overview of PIPE? And Ben did answer this, saying where there's information on the website, but I just wanted to comment that maybe that's something we can consider, you know, as a webinar that's produced, or do you all have one?
Mimi or Ben, I can't remember. Let's see. Ben says, yes, much of our work is with STEM educators. Okay, so I can't remember if we have a recorded webinar on that. If we don't, we can certainly plan one. On our YouTube channel that you can link to from our homepage, we've got a lot of great webinars up there about the STEM Career Toolkit, about the Non-Trad Toolkit, about different applications of the work that we do. So I definitely encourage you to listen to those. It's great to plug in while you're on the treadmill or while you're driving, or any time you're on the road. You may not see the images, no watching images while you're driving, but you can at least listen.
Okay, I think that takes care of most of our questions. There are two things that have come up that are just things that you might have reflection on. And so I will ask this one. This says, there's a huge work-based learning effort underway in the U.S. I can foresee that more focus on involving off-school WBL supervisors of students in equity training will yield improvement in students' field experiences. Could you make some comment?
Yeah, I see that training everyone to be great educators, and no matter what the capacity is a good idea. Whether they're informal educators or formal educators. And so I think, again, what we do know about from the research is that, you know, we do what we know most often, right? Especially when we're stressed or busy. That's what we see a lot in the system of how we teach, right? Like, people are going to teach many times the way that they were taught. And so, again, they only know what they know. And so until we help to turn on some light bulbs and to challenge some of the ways of doing, then we won't have the opportunity to really challenge the status quo and to do things differently. So I do think that training work-based learning supervisors is really key, especially in non-traditional careers and pathways, so that we make sure that the messages that they're unintentionally sending can begin to be mitigated, so that they are inclusive spaces for all of our students, no matter their gender, to participate. So yes, it is a big challenge and opportunity.
Thank you, Megan. One more. This one is from Rosemary. I would like more information about how to work with college professors who may have been teaching engineering for years and believe that they don't do anything that might offend a woman in their classes, and that they are quick to indicate they are very accepting and encouraging of women in their engineering classes. And I'm not sure why I have twinkling going on, but goodbye.
So I know some of those engineering professors. We all know some of those professors, and they are in lots of different disciplines. So one of the things that I think is so powerful about the micromessaging to reach and teach every student curriculum and how that grounds our work is that it really starts with a sort of broad idea of understanding cultural stereotypes. And people are it's very easy to identify stereotypes. And the way that we follow that cultural framework and how we step into that of understanding the stereotypes and understanding how those stereotypes become biased and understanding how those manifest, we find that we've been more successful in helping people to kind of turn on the light bulb. I do not expect that if I get, you know, a half a day with some engineering faculty that they're going to leave my workshop and be 100% equitable educators. We know that's not going to happen, right? But what I do want to happen is that they leave with a light switch turned on, that they leave thinking differently about the students that they serve, and they leave thinking differently about their own practice and how they can begin to change and to transform their practice. And so we've got some great testimonials, probably more anecdotal from us as instructors, about people who we've been able to help to see those light bulbs, those aha moments of wow, this is really different. One of the approaches that for me is effective is, and when I get to work with engineering faculty, is because I'm an engineer and I've been through the system, and I get to tell stories that kind of touch a little closer to home for them. One of the approaches that we also take in helping people to understand some of these messages is making it really personal, right? I did this with my father. I've done this with my father when he works in technology, and as I'm been older, he'll tell like jokes that have been around the coffee table at work, and I guess he tells them when I'm around at home, and I say, Dad, I want you to say that joke again, but I want you to put my name in there rather than just saying some woman. And it changes it, right? When that woman or girl in that joke now has a face, and that the face of someone that he cares about, it makes a big difference. And so those are some of the strategies that we use to help to influence some of the most challenging of participants.
Okay, Megan, I think we're ready to move on to the chat activity.
Okay, great. Well, these were all excellent questions, and I'm so grateful that you've been active. So what I want to do is to challenge you to put that into a different kind of format. So what we're going to move towards here is an opportunity for you to share and to reflect and to build on some of the ideas that you've heard of and to share some of the things that you're doing. So what you'll notice on the screen here, you've got 3 chat boxes, and I've divided them up in pre and elementary school, middle and high school, and post-secondary. So pre and elementary is on the left, middle and high school is in the middle, and then post-secondary on the right. And so what I'd like for you to do is to pick one of the chat boxes. Pick the one that best suits you. And I want you to have a discussion using some of the, following the questions there on the left. So what strategies have you learned, or what strategies have you used in your practice that you want to share? Then I want you to think about in what ways could you use NAEP's programs, services, tools, and products to improve student access and success in the work that you do. And then also feel free to offer what are your key takeaways and actions. And so with this, it might be a little quiet, right? But we're all working, we're all engaging, we're all chatting here in this box. So this will give an opportunity, an equitable space for everyone to have a voice. So I'll see you in the chat box.
So let's keep going for about 1 more minute. So if you've got some last-minute thoughts and ideas, go ahead and get those typed into the chat box. And then what we'll do is we'll have each of the facilitators for the boxes do a quick report out, and we'll start wrapping up for the workshop today. So type in those final ideas, those final thoughts, and final applications and reflections. Thank you. Okay, it looks like some of the typing has slowed. So let's go to Ben. So Ben, could you provide us a just quick snapshot of some of the ideas that were captured in your chat box?
So this has been delightful, and my fingers are smoking from typing so fast, but lots of great ideas. I think the work of today has really resonated with our colleagues from post-secondary institutions. And one quick caveat I want to provide to everyone was a comment that was made very early in the webinar, and that was that post-secondary institutions are not only four-year institutions. And you're absolutely right, whoever said that, and I apologize, I didn't write down the name. So one of the resources I really like to use comes out of Georgetown's Center for Education in the Workforce called 5 Ways That Pay Along the Way to the BA, to really broaden the lens through which people look at post-secondary pathways, especially into high-tech, high-skill, high-wage careers. And so those 5 ways are apprenticeships, occupational certificates, employer-based training, college certificates, and associate degrees, which can be completed, through workforce development programs, adult education, community colleges, and the like. So I want to really expand even our whole conversation around post-secondary education. But a lot of the comments revolved around training of advisors and counselors, engaging faculty in conversations related to micromessaging, really starting to help people to become aware of how implicit bias may create barriers to students in post-secondary education. So it seemed to really resonate, and people were very excited about it. So I would encourage everyone from the post-secondary world to let us know how we can help you. We are eager to do so. Next.
And thank you. All right, Mimi, what happened in your chat box for middle and high school students?
Oh, we had a pretty active group, and Ben, I think I'm more than smoke, and my fingers are on fire. We had some conversation around the use of positive micromessages, even in amongst peers at the staff level, but also at the student level, and it's sort of an interesting strand of conversation around using this content with students. Lori Toney from Colorado mentioned the fact that they were going to do some micromessaging training with the CTSO advisors and then distribute the toolkits with student officers at their training camp this summer. Great strategy. And for those of you who have been to our national summit, you may recall last year we had a group of students from San Jose High School who had participated in NAEP's professional development sort of by mistake. It's a long story. And it's been really has transformed what's going on in that high school. I also think that the conversation really focused a lot on getting to understand our own biases and how they affect others, and even though they're unintentional, and that the non-traditional career preparation root causes document is a useful tool and a framework to sort of begin to get your head wrapped around a lot of the strategies that can be implemented. So there we go.
Great, thank you, Mimi. So I had a pretty small group, but we kind of expected that. But we had a powerful group. So I had Freda Walker, one of our facilitators, and Sarah McRae. Sarah McRae works with NASA, and so she was sharing some examples of how the activities that they develop, how they have to make them very relatable and to a very broad audience. And she talked about a great resource that I'd like to share with all of you. She uses the Sci Girls 7. And so just Google that, SCI, so like science, but Sci Girls 7 strategies, and those are excellent, excellent tools that are, again, grounded in the literature into creating effective and equitable STEM learning environments. So check that out. And Freda talked about in her role as she is a coach and training leaders and training superintendents, and how she'll use this to help connect them with powerful stories of micromessages as well. So with that, I want to thank each of you so much for your participation in this activity. This is a new format for us, and so please in your evaluations let us know what you think about it and whether we should try this chat forum again. With this, Mimi, let's go back to the present mode, and then we'll let you wrap up the day for us.
All right. So I think there are a few key takeaway points that we hope that you'll carry.
Can you start your webcam, please?
Oh, sorry. I will do that.
Yeah. Thank you.
I was trying to keep my bandwidth use down, so hopefully this won't crash me. So a couple of key takeaway points I wanted to sort of bring to everybody's thinking as we step away from this and move on to the rest of our daily work. The first thing is that changing the culture of schools to improve educational equity and access is a process. And that's why our philosophy has always been about trying to build capacity of educators to utilize a process, and in this case it's the program improvement process for equity, to really study and understand the barriers that are going on. We could easily, walk in here and say, do these 5 things and all will be well, hand out the silver bullet. But we know that this is a much more complex issue that requires really understanding the nature of your own institution and what are the things that come into play there. So thinking about how you utilize PIPE is important, and the fact that it has application significantly beyond the way we use it. You certainly could use it for lots of other issues that you may be experiencing. The second key takeaway point is we must interrupt the cycle of negative micromessages and bolster student self-efficacy with positive micromessages so they can realize their potential. And the micromessaging curriculum really focuses on this whole notion and brings the research literature to practice. And I think that the great thing that's happening now for us is the development of these toolkits that are focused on components of that particular curriculum, where we can really build out the content and deliver it to those of you who have an interest in this work in various ways. So again, unintentional. We have to understand our own implicit biases and how those biases are expressed in micromessages, and how those micromessages affect student self-efficacy is a critical part of the culture wheel. The third takeaway point is educators are the catalyst for improving educational equity, student access, and workforce diversity. We believe that you all carry tremendous power in this process. And I could see it in the chat when you're talking about all various ways in which you hope to take this message back to your colleagues as well as to students directly. The way we look at it is we believe that the multiplying factor here in terms of impact really sits with educators, and if we can change your thinking and the ways in which the practices that you're engaging in, the leveraging of that impact is tremendous. So there are some key steps to transforming practices, and we hope you'll keep these in mind as you take this information with you. Identify and address our implicit biases. Build student self-efficacy through multiple avenues. affirm and encourage exploration of career pathways outside of gender norms, create equitable classrooms and school climates for every individual to fulfill their potential. We've, I think, probably pretty much exhausted our questions and comments, but you're welcome as we wrap this up. Please add any additional questions you may have into the chat, and we can answer those as we're moving forward. So Naomi wants me to put, is this the, Naomi, I'm assuming this is the slide you want me to put back up about the key steps to transforming practice. That'll help you. So a couple of things I wanted to bring to everyone's attention, and I'm going to, Naomi, I'll come back and load this slide at the very end if that's helpful to you if you didn't get it all. But I want to remind you that NAEP does more than just professional development. We provide technical assistance to LEAs and state agencies. We also conduct research and evaluation and are involved with public policy and advocacy. And we believe that these four components, our four lines of business, are critical and important to our work. There's certainly lots of products and services that Megan's already shared with you, so I hope you'll take advantage of these. I wanted to mention a couple of other places to get resources from us, and certainly our website is one of them. So if you go to napequity.org, that's probably the fastest way to get there, and you can access that information. If you happen to be in an institution that's an affiliate member or are working for a state agency that's a state-level member, you also have access to Behind the Membership Firewall. And if you're not either one of those and you want to become a member, don't forget, you can do that as well. Just go to the website and all the information about membership is there. Let us know if we can answer any of your questions about affiliate membership for local institutions or state-level membership if you're not from a member state. In addition, we have our upcoming National Summit for Educational Equity, April 12th to the 14th at the Westin Hotel in Alexandria, Virginia. If you're not registered to come, register now. This is a fabulous time to engage with your colleagues on looking at educational equity. Megan will be conducting 2 pre-conference sessions on April 11th. The STEM Equity Pipeline Leadership Institute will also be held on April 11th for those participating in our National Science Foundation grants. And then we have a fabulous program full of workshops and great keynote speakers. Linda Darling-Hammond, Edie Moore, Alan Blankstein, they're all fabulous national speakers are speaking at the conference, so join us in Alexandria, Virginia. So I noticed that Lori asked a question about individual level memberships. And Lori will be releasing in June our first individual membership kickoff. The organization's always been an individual membership, an institutional membership organization, but their leadership in this last year decided to add an individual membership option. So that will become available. Again, I want to thank all of our presenters, and especially Freda Walker and Greg Nagy, the great group in the background who keeps us all on track and makes sure the technology functions well and answers many of your questions behind the scenes. And again, to my colleagues, Megan Pollack and Ben Williams, for their great engagement in this webinar as well. So, Freda, I'm going to hand it back to you and let you do your last housekeeping items with everyone. Make sure that they
yes, I just want to say
they need to do.
I just want to say thank you to everyone who participated today. We had an outstanding group, and a lot of people participated. So thank you so much. And I want you to complete the survey and download the certificate so that you can have that for your institution or your agency. And you can see here that I still have the key links that are here if you need them. Also the documents to download, and we'll leave this up for a while, and I'll ask Greg right now to to send the Survey Monkey out so that people can tell us how we did today. We appreciate all the input that you give us. It helps us guide us in improving our webinars and what we offer. So thank you.
Thank you, Freda. So I'm going to click this webinar evaluation link right now, and this may or may not open for you. If it does and you have time, please fill that out now. If not, I will be sending this link in an email shortly to everyone that registered, if you don't have time right now. And like Freda mentioned, there's other links there. So this webinar will be archived probably tomorrow at the equity.org/professional-development/webinars website. And I think that's about it. So I just want to thank everyone, and this is the end of the webinar.
Thank you, Greg.